I now call this committee of the whole, the Davenport Community School District Board of Directors to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I do want to note for the record that Director Beck is joining us by Zoom tonight. We will move on to the first discussion, subject 1.03, at-risk continuum supports, and I will turn it over to the superintendent.
So tonight, Jen Van Fleet and Courtney Olson are going to talk to us about our at-risk programming. One of the many hats that Miss Van Fleet wears is our state and federal programs. So thank you for being here tonight.
Pleasure.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to come back and share our progress to date on where we are at building our at-risk continuum. Oh, we need the mouse. So just to ground us back on our why that we presented last time we were all in front of you in December and January is our why is to design a PK-12 continuum of services with our system to meet the academic and social, emotional, and behavioral needs of our at-risk students in an effort to ensure high school graduation and a productive, hopeful vision for their post-secondary life. Also, just to remind you that when we talk about at-risk, this is how we're defining at-risk, homeless, dropout, returning dropout, potential dropout, and alternative programming. When we say potential dropout, because we know that can be a confusing term, these are the variables that we're looking at: attendance, school engagement, academics, and literacy and numeracy. So low achievement in those areas. If you recall this visual, we first presented this to you in December of 22. So we had to come in front of you guys to get approval for spending for our at-risk programming, but we knew looking at the plan that it was kind of status quo year to year. We had reviewed data and determined that we really weren't making the impact that we wanted to do. And we had a deadline of getting the financial approval from you all to utilize the dollars. So we came before with you, shared that current reality, and asked if we could get that approval with your trust in us that we are really committed to building at-risk programming in a true continuum, that we don't want to keep status quo. And you all, we are so grateful that you approved that for us. And so we want to update you today where we are. So this bottom row is really where our work has been going. We've set common goals. We've been rethinking what at-risk could and should look like for our students. We've been transparent with our stakeholders and getting feedback to inform our planning. And again, all in hopes of building that true at-risk continuum. So this is just another visual to iterate that continuous improvement process that we've been living in, where we took information from our principals around strengths and barriers and have began developing and implementing a plan. So just to bring to light, again, what we said we would do for that goals area, we really did that initial needs assessment. We got feedback from our leaders and stakeholders around what's going well, what's not. We analyzed that, and we made connections between district priority work and best practices. We've been meeting weekly as an at-risk task team to keep this work moving forward. We've been reviewing resources. We've been cascading with different stakeholders. And we're really looking at that continuum of supports, keeping in mind our conceptual areas of leadership, universal, intensified, assessment, database, decision-making, and infrastructure, and developing a timeline for implementation. We've also been looking at, as we're building a continuum, how are we going to decide where and when to deploy what resources? So we've been analyzing percent of poverty, enrollment, age band, and specific needs. Lastly, we've been making sure that we're tying it back to our goal areas of academics, attendance, emotional safety, and graduation rates, and also really rethinking all of the funding sources available. How can we be creative in using all these available sources to make this happen? And now I'm going to pass it on to Jen Van Fleet.
Thank you, Courtney, for that recap of where we've been since we last visited you. So what we want to do tonight is continue the conversation and show you at what we are going to do as we're moving forward. And so what you see on this slide is a table that's showing in those areas. We talked about the goal areas a couple times. We have some really great current work happening, and then we're always having conversations about what that future work looks like. So this is a snapshot of that thought now. This continuously evolves as we recognize need, as we evaluate what's happening. This is the conversation of that at-risk team that was formed based on that commitment. So we did a lot of current work with expanding our teacher in charge roles to our secondary buildings and redefining teacher in charge roles and SAM roles for academics. For attendance, we have retooled an existing position that was called the Family Involvement Liaison. It's now called the Family Support Liaison, and they are a major support structure for families, especially with the attendance initiative that our district is undertaking. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We've established an attendance task force for the district, as that was a lot of the data that raised to the top about what's a major need that's driving all of these at-risk factors. And then in the area of emotional safety, we created a new role called a behavioral strategist. We've had a lot of names for that role. That's where we've landed right now. And they're working with tier 2 and tier 3 needs of students as they're presenting needs through behavior in schools. And they're getting specific and intensive training to support those tier 2 and tier 3 interventions through a program called Life Space, which I believe has been presented before. And then also this year, we had a big celebration with the launch of our therapeutic classrooms with the SESI classrooms. Longer range future work for the emotional safety area would include looking closer at that district long-term discipline. There's a lot of conversations going on right now about how do we adequately support that network, get kids where they need to be, where they can be successful, and not max out the system, but make the system work for that. And then we want to look at expanding our opportunities with therapeutic supports and services. For graduation rates, we are introducing this fall, the Bridges program for incoming 9th graders who need an extra boost of support as they're transitioning from 8th grade. Maybe 8th grade and 7th grade was really rocky for them, and they need help just on that launch of high school and then on that trajectory to graduation. We also are establishing a re-engagement center at Mid-City, which I believe is to support returning dropouts and potential dropouts. And then we have doubled down on that credit recovery. The credit recovery continues to be a big piece at our high schools through our summer learning, and we want to continue to support that. And then overarching, and we've mentioned these throughout, but they kind of lend themselves well to all the goal areas. We have done just an intensive amount of work planning the professional development and the support that all of these groups of people need in order to do their job well. We don't want to just say, oh, we've introduced this role, off you go, and we hope the goal moves. We've been really thinking deeply and looking at all of the options for professional learning. And you're going to see, we've already launched some of it, and August is a huge month for PD. So if you're out and about, you'll be able to see some of those other PD structures that we have in place. And then we're also, we did a lot of work this year with developing new or reimagining or redefining roles. I gave it the example of the family support liaison, to think about what their role is, what their responsibilities are, not just in a single role, but how those roles weave together to really create that continuum and network of supports. And then we've been working a lot on a very clear definition of tier 2 and tier 3 supports. Our future work really lies in that system-wide clarity and role definition for all roles and their responsibilities, again, how they intertwine and operate as a single role. We want to have just an outstanding system of professional learning and coaching around each at-risk role, and there are some roles that are next on dock to really look closer at what they need. And then we are also interested in looking at what it takes to launch an early implementing an early warning system so we can, as early as possible, identify our students and what their needs are. So with that plan and our we got the plan out, we talked out, where the plan's always evolving. The next part of that continuous improvement process is really implementing the actions. And we're really excited. We came to you kind of with a dream. We're here today to give you an update, and now we're starting this next school year with specific actions in place, and we are here to support the implementation. So what does that look like? Again, this is just a slide nodding to those new positions created. You'll see them out in the buildings. They would be open to talking to you about their role and how they support students and how they're a part of the system of the buildings. And then again, August is so heavy on PD and then ongoing professional development. We would love to have any of you there to kind of see how we support our folks to be successful. We're going to talk a little bit about the attendance initiative, but we're excited about really digging into chronic absenteeism and just our overall ADA. So we're going to talk about our initiative, which is showing up together and strive for less than 5 absences. And then also new that you'll see this year is a universal tier of adopting a new SEBH curriculum, which you've seen presented before. That's the Character Strong, if you remember, that was adopted. I want to pause here, though, and let Courtney talk a little bit about the attendance initiative.
So we know that attendance is not only a priority for you guys as a board, but as us as a district. We have a district-wide goal around that. And so we've been able to pull a task team together and really start working at, okay, what are we trying to accomplish as a district, as an entire system, knowing that it's a need across our system. So starting in late May, we've had a task team meet weekly to get this work going. We've utilized resources that the DE has pushed out around this. We're utilizing Attendance Works, which is pretty the highest evidence-based resources that are out there that we reviewed. So we've been using their self-assessment, reviewing their resources, identifying where we have strengths, where we need to grow, and we've began developing an implementation plan and starting to put some of those actions in place. So one of the big actions that we have been able to accomplish this summer is what is our district-wide campaign. We know we're kind of starting at ground zero as a district coming off of COVID, so we really want to make awareness around this for not only our internal and our external stakeholders. So we really liked the saying showing up together because it not only applies to our students, but our adults as well. And we really like sending that message. We also know that as a district, we've had success in the past using Strive for Less Than 5 just because it gives that number for people to hold on to as they're navigating the school year with all of the things. So this is our campaign that we're pushing out. We have banners ordered that we're going to have in English, as you see here. It looks a little bit different now, but also in Spanish posted in all of our schoolyards. We're also planning to partner with community partners so that they can put banners in their yards or they can put our slogan on their boards and really be in this together in promoting this. We also know that we need to grow just the capacity of understanding with our external stakeholders of how important attendance is and what poor attendance can lead to. So we're putting together one-pagers, both at the elementary and secondary level, that aren't only pushing out our slogan, but giving them information around these things. We're also creating quick access like QR codes to get to school directories, to get to the school calendars, just really to remove barriers for parents and families and having good communication with schools regarding their students. We've also just last week got to share this information with all of our leaders in the district for them to start making connections to their own growing excellence plans and the work that they've been doing. A lot of our buildings are doing a lot of great work around this. So we had opportunities to share among each other to start learning from one another. And we're going to continue that tomorrow at BSAT Summit with our building leadership teams, knowing that this is a goal as a district, this is what we're doing at a district, and then what are those next steps you're taking at a building level based off your individual context. So our team will continue to meet throughout the year. We plan to have a year-long plan of like what's our goals for the fall, the winter, and the spring. And we're going to ask that of our buildings too. So we're really excited and hopeful to get this off the ground, and we'll keep you posted.
So again, As you look at the continuous improvement process, it looks like it's 5 separate steps, but really they're entwined, because right now we're at the point where we're ready to implement the actions. We're not going to wait until deadlines and goals are due. We're going to be monitoring that as we go. We definitely want to assess the impact. If you remember, we came to you in December with these data points that we said we weren't happy with, that we wanted to move the needle on. And so these will be the data points that we continue to look at. We'll come back to you in December and again present to you where another year of these data points are. But we're going to continue to look at those more than once a year. Our team is committed to monitoring these ongoing, as well as collecting feedback from the people who are implementing the different pieces of our at-risk continuum. So the other part of this, as far as ongoing assessment of impact, the questions that we're going to ask ourselves will be things around what might we need to adjust. We have a start of the continuum of support, but what do those exact programs and positions look like? What does the professional development need look like? And what does that implementation support look like? And then we want to get our feet underneath us and start looking at not just right now and addressing the problem that's right here in front of us, but what does a year from now look like? What does 2 years look like from now? So again, that pie in the sky that we are committed to getting to is the set of well-defined roles, the training and the onboarding, those collaborative structures, and the coaching that everybody needs to be able to support our kiddos. So thank you for letting us come and give an update, and we'd love to have any feedback or questions.
Director Klein Jerome.
I know what a SAM and a teacher in charge look like at the elementary, but could you tell me what that role is going to look like at the secondary level? Those two.
Sure. So they're pretty similar. The teacher in charge is largely looking at what's happening with the teaching population. What are the needs that arise up out of that? Is that helping with de-escalating students? Is that helping with jumping in and co-teaching with a teacher? Is it a coverage person when somebody might be out unexpectedly? Do you want to go any further into that?
And just to clarify, SAMs will live within our elementary layer, and teacher in charges will be in our secondary layer. There are some teacher in charges in elementary, but there will be no SAMs at the secondary level. I just wanted to clarify that. And we also see this being a good stakeholder for our attendance initiative too. So that's feedback we got as well, just having time at that level to support to that.
Director Barnes.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions, and I'm always sort of thinking about how things connect together. How does the core diploma fit into these initiatives? I didn't hear it mentioned, and I would think that that's probably central. Second, how does the online learning program fit into these initiatives? And while I appreciate the coming back in December, I'm very curious about how we will be measuring these various things, and if it's going to be by school, by grade, by employment category, and I guess maybe the fourth, which is connected to that, is December too long? I mean, we could have a lot of information at the end of the first quarter. So you can address any of those that you want to.
No, I appreciate you bringing up online and core. When we sat down to do this, we were afraid to do a laundry list of things because so many things could have been, but those are 2 great options that we've been talking about recently that do connect into our at-risk system and that we should have identified there. How to measure, we have those data points that Jen just shared, but I like where your brain was going because sometimes those are so large that we could get more specific to know how to intervene better. So I think that is something that we still need to define and would be open to feedback around that. And yeah, December is kind of the timeline for that financial approval, but we're not just here to get financial approval. So I do think there's opportunity to come back sooner.
We'll come visit anytime. We love it. But you're right. Each one of these goal areas could be broken down, and you can start measuring chronic absenteeism from day one, right? So we're not going to wait till December. We're going to be able to see within the first week, is there a red flag with a family? And we have actions surrounding that. What does that look like for each role? And we even have some roles starting right now. The family support liaisons for our most in need buildings start on August 1st, specifically reaching out to our chronically absent families and seeing if there's anything they can do to help them out. And that's just an example. So we're not going to wait. December is a required point where we come back to you, but this will be ongoing.
Director Hayes.
You mentioned the risk factors for the students. Can you walk me through beginning to end for a student having problem? How would they get into where we're actually monitoring to make sure that they succeed?
That's what we utilize our MTSS for. So, we're still building and perfecting everywhere along our continuum in our MTSS. But knowing that we have strong practices and good instruction and good materials in place at our core is step one, right? It's when we know we have those things in place and we don't see students responding when we would adjust to do something differently. And then again, towards that tier 3, how are we becoming more individualized? So when we think of like you saw a variety of things up there, like our SEBH curriculum rollout, like that's universally. We know that we need to have something in place across the board. When you get to more some of those at-risk programming options like bridges or potentially a long-term discipline placement, that's where we're getting more towards that tier 3, and we know we have to do something more individual for that student. But we have teams in places in our buildings, our student intervention teams that are monitoring that. We have support at our level to support that. So that's in a very small synopsis how we see all those things connecting together.
So when we talk about, for example, defining the collaborative structures, an example of that is how would a family support liaison know that they need to contact Ms. Olson's family? And that would be directly through what you shared with that the SIT team. If you've ever gotten to sit with that, they can refer students' families to a specific person who can help out in a certain capacity. So we're defining, again, not only what does that individual do, but how do they network together to serve kids and families.
Director Poston.
As far as the attendance task force, who will be involved on that task force, and what will their duties or roles be?
So it was representation from our building leaders from preschool to high school. There was representation from my Department of Equity and Learning Supports with Jen Van Fleet, Shani Ford, Rachel Ivory. And then there was, we had curriculum, people represented from our curriculum department there. We've had principals asked to join because they're passionate about it. So that's been our representation to date, with the goal then being that we're working in collaboration with building leadership teams, and that's where you have your teacher representation, your building level representation there.
So how will they implement actually getting boots on the ground and getting out into the community and getting students to the class, and how are we going to put teeth into this as far as putting pressure on parents to get their child to school?
So a couple things to date is this summer worked alongside our data person to develop our ADA, our chronic absenteeism monitoring tool. So that buildings right now, principals have access to this, and so they know who's coming into their who's starting school with them, who were chronically absent last year. So then talking with them on how can we be contacting those families now, and we've developed scripts that they could call them with. We've developed a district-wide door hanger that if they go to do a visit, they can leave information there. So that's one way that we are doing that right now. I think too, just with our district initiative and how we're trying to get out there, just how we can partner with our community as well. Those are a couple things that come to mind right now.
Will you partner with the Davenport Police Department as far as getting out and getting putting pressure on parents?
As a community partner, I think that's something we could take into consideration.
And another thing, could the board get a monthly report of absenteeism by building and by grade?
Yeah.
And then you mentioned behavioral strategist. Will there be one in every building?
We do have one in every building, yes.
And I didn't see anything as far as some of the, you mentioned some of the programs and funding that is available. Will there be any expansion of IJAG?
I think that's work still to be done, that's a program that's up and running in our system, and that we need to better make connections with other things in our system. So it's still on our continuum. Again, not everything was listed here, but it's still a part of our continuum, our budget, and just trying to consider how to make more intentional connections with that program in our system.
Well, when we talk about graduation rates, I think that the IJAG program would be, something that we really have to strengthen even more. And just one last thing, when we're talking about this overall program and everything, I think it still comes back to we need pre-K. And I've mentioned this before, if we can get pre-K in every building, and I know that's going to be tough to do and it's going to be expensive, but if we can get earlier touches on these kids so they know what's expected of them, and so they get the influence of a good environment earlier on in their life, I think that will help down the road. I think right now we're playing catch up. I mean, sometimes things go so far that we can't bring it back, and so I'm hoping that we can get to these kids at an earlier age and eliminate a lot of these problems.
Director Potts.
Could you once again just refresh me on what the role of the teacher in charge is going to be? What's their function or their job description?
Do you
So they are they're an extension of the staff. They're a teacher in a teacher role, and they are making sure that the connections that they have with the students, as far as like behavior needs that rise up in classrooms, or if there is a teacher who is struggling. Oh, so sorry. So sorry. Usually I'm the loud one. So, but they'll be helping kind of monitor and make sure that tier 2 is really being identified and developed. As teachers are noticing that tier 1 is working for most and maybe not a few, they can help kind of work through that. They can certainly make referrals to tier 3 services, and they can absolutely be helping with the absenteeism initiative and making family connections and being on that attendance task force, boots on the ground.
They don't have any classroom assignment. They're not okay, and so that's in the secondary buildings, right?
Yes.
And the behavioral strategist, what's their role? Is there one of them in every secondary building?
Every building has one.
And
yes.
what is their role?
So their role is to be that universal behavioral support that when students are dysregulated in the classroom, to help students become regulated. So they're a very specific position to help with that. That will have received life space training to do that.
And so you have those two people, then you have your guidance counselors, 2 or more guidance counselors. You have an associate principal, a principal. And in many respects, maybe your security people can do just as much
Depending what level,
to keep some kid in school as anybody else. Okay. You had said something about they're covering classes.
Oh.
I would
There is a one line item, and I think it's only on the elementary version of the teacher in charge that they could serve that role in the in a pinch, an emergency where there's no one, because they do have a teaching license. They could be in that coverage rotation for that building, as are many other roles.
I would suggest that based on our teacher attendance of last year, if I was a principal and I had somebody that I could say, okay, you can make attendance calls, or you can cover that class because you've got nobody in there, you know what choice I'm going to make. That's a no-brainer. So it's conceivable that these people may be spending more time doing that than we might like.
So we'll definitely have to.
I'm just,
yeah.
I'm thinking in terms of, I got a pinch hitter.
And that's where that implementation support comes into play, and that's something we can absolutely monitor. We've had other roles where they've been pushed or pulled into like a duty or something where it's eaten away at where they have time, and that's where we help advocate and clarify and troubleshoot, and we would do the same for this role too.
I'd also park them in the lunchroom. Just saying.
Director Beck, do you have anything? And also, when you guys are speaking, please speak into the microphone so she can hear you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to know exactly what a teacher in charge did, and I missed a lot of that because I couldn't hear what Bruce was saying. I apologize. So a teacher in charge is not a teacher. A teacher in charge is not a teacher, but has a teaching license. So have they been a teacher? How do they end up in this role? And then their job is to help the teachers. And then I caught the part about the coverage. And I agree with Director Potts that maybe that should be minimized just so that it doesn't become too much of a role that they're doing. But exactly what do you mean by like helping the teachers? And were they teachers that have been pulled into this role, or how does that work?
So just to clarify, they're in a teacher contract and they hold a teaching license. It's a credentialed position. By helping really, we're talking about helping the whole system. So if they can help maintain that continuum of supports through identifying kids who need that tier 2 support and defining what it is the next step is, that's going to help that classroom teacher get down to business of what they need to do with everybody. So it could be that teacher in charge works directly with TJ who's having some troubles today. It could be that teacher in charge helps that teacher come up with a plan to help TJ stay engaged in the right way in the classroom. That's more what we meant by helping teachers.
Okay. And so these are not people who have been in our classrooms necessarily and being pulled to this role. Is that correct?
I couldn't say specifically, but I believe a lot of them were hired internally and were teachers in our district.
Okay. And then, so would I be wrong to say it's almost like a partner who observes the classroom, the students, and kind of steps in, and the teacher, and steps in with either helping the student or helping the teacher if they need it? Is that kind of...
That could be one way it unfolds. It could also be someone who receives the referrals of where we find out kids are needing help or a class is needing help, where behavior can be addressed. So they could go to classrooms, absolutely. And they could also have students sent to them or work with teachers outside of the classroom on plans.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense then. And then, so a SAM is more of somebody who's helping with the principal. Is that correct?
Correct. So your SAM is your your school administrative manager. I mess up that acronym every time. And so their job is to make sure the principal is freed up to be that instructional leader as much as possible. So they're doing as much of that building management work that they can do to take off of that principal's plate so that principal can be in classrooms being that instructional leader.
Okay, thank you. I have two other questions. In the process of redefining definitions and responsibilities, where are you guys looking sort of, are these ideas that you've come up with just through observation? I know I heard at least some of it was research-based. Are we looking at districts who've made improvements in their chronic absenteeism, for example, and asking what they did? How are we deciding what roles we need to create and or redefine?
All of the above. We made a visit to Iowa City, partnered with them, asked them questions when they had some similar type roles. We have looked at research. We've gotten feedback. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I would just say trying to clean up any role confusion within our system where humans and roles were just created at building level, added into their system, but not really defining what their purpose and responsibilities were. So we're trying to clean that up so we can support those roles better as a system and be more intentional, like Jen's already mentioned, in those connections of how they bring to life our MTSS.
Thank you. My last question, and I know we've asked this before, but with the pandemic, we've really put an effort or an emphasis on not coming to school if you're sick, right? And so I like the phrasing of strive for less than 5 because it doesn't say, we're not giving out perfect attendance awards or anything anymore. But how are we navigating that that fine line between, asking students to stay home if they're sick versus, being in school as much as possible?
I think that will fall into that just growing the capacity of our families around what are the expectations now that we're out of the pandemic, but also creating that accessibility where they can be communicating with their building if they want to process or ask questions about something. So that's how we see evolving that.
Okay, thank you.
Director Klein-Jerome.
I'm going to advocate for the classroom teacher that when you have teachers absent and they are asked over and over and over again to sub for them, but the teacher in charge is never asked to do that. We all play in the same ball game. We're all should be stepping in. Administrators should step in and take a class. Teachers in charge, anybody, the counselor, anybody who does not have a class, I guess there should be some rotation in there. But to say, oh, we're going to not make the teacher in charge go into too many classes. Oh, well, you consume the whole day of a teacher if you make them cover somebody else's class. So I want to make sure that is fair and equitable and that the classroom teachers aren't looking around going, yeah, I should apply for that job because I never have to sub for somebody because it gets old and that's where your morale, and that's when they go, I think I'll be gone tomorrow because I've had enough of this. So keep that in mind when you're looking at who goes in and subs.
Director Barnes.
I just have one last thing, and maybe this is just for me because I'm new to all of this. But as part of this enterprise, and especially as we're thinking about chronic absenteeism, I've heard behavioral strategist, teacher in charge, SAM, principal, school counselor, classroom teacher, assistant principal, and security. It sounds like everybody is responsible, but I'm still not quite sure who's accountable. And so it might be useful, at least for me, again, new to all of this, to understand, to Director Postjan's comment, who's making the calls, who's making the visits, who's on sort of the hook, because this certainly could be a bit of a game of hot potato. So
So I want to highlight our structure. So this year we're creating an early warning system that populates the data every night at midnight. So we have live data at our fingertips. Our instructional leadership directors meet biweekly with the principals, and every single building has a growing excellence plan. Inside that plan, have goals very specific around the review of data and student needs. And so the biweekly meetings that occur with our ILDs and the building principals, they're having conversations like, let's pull up your attendance data. Let's talk about, hey, I noticed that there's been a spike in behaviors in your cafeteria. Let's talk about that. Those conversations, those accountable conversations are happening in our biweekly meetings. We also have a team that reviews data on a cadence, and we report that data to the board. That's where Director Hayes' board data wall request, we are in the stages of finalizing that. So I think the connectedness and the way that we are putting our data on a cadence to review is where the accountable piece is. And one of the things that we are always going to focus on leading and with our hearts and our minds, but knowing that there is a consequence if you do not come to school. But what we try to do in terms of attendance is build that relationship. Once you do use that hammer, it's really difficult to bring that relationship back. Now, there needs to be consequences. There needs to be common language around the consequences of the actions of not coming to school, because you're missing part of the movie when you miss a day of school. And so the other portion of it is, what if you did have COVID and you missed 5 days? So the second layer of that data review is this student actually getting their work done now? Are they at risk? Are they behind with more than one factor? And that's what I would say our buildings are looking at on a continuous basis. So that district student achievement team, each one of our buildings has a building student achievement team that is full of teachers and staff members that are reviewing that data. So that I would say that, and we need to improve on that. That is a definite goal area for us this year. We met with our administrators and let them know that is one of my big focus areas for this year.
Director Poston.
Well, I'll disagree a little bit. I think we need to put some teeth into this attendance. This has been going on for so long, and it's been neglected. And if we don't do something, nothing's going to change. And we can review data until the cows come home, but we've got to act and we've got to do something. And just a follow-up to Director Barnes and Director Potts's comments. When we talk about accountability, my thought is, when you look at the teacher, would the teacher rather have a para in her classroom all the time, or a teacher in charge, taking care of the entire building? My guess is that she would rather have that para, and again, would also help with some behavior issues in the classroom.
Director Beck, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
All right, I have a couple questions. I'm mainly going to hone in on the attendance part because that's been a real deal. And I like the fact if we're getting a report on it every month, that really holds buildings accountable. But at the same time, I don't think that people understand the lengths that buildings go to try to get kids at school. And I think when Director Poston was talking about partnering with the police department, it's probably truancy officers that need to really start, and that maybe that's something we can bring up in our meeting with the mayor and try to hone in on that. But then we'll be the bad guys because we want kids in school. So I understand that. I will be interested to see how the data turns out with the new law changes with minors being able to work longer hours and things like that, because I feel that that's going to be a huge factor in high school. I think it's going to add to the dropout rate. I think it's going to add to attendance, because if your parents don't make enough money and you got to have a third income coming in, you're going to go to work. I mean, that's just how it is. That's how it's always been. So I'll be interested to see how that goes and if that played into any of the discussions at the high school level. I don't foresee it really being an issue at the junior high level, but the high school level, I can see it really being something. So I don't know if there's supports in there. We might have to partner with a different outside agency to maybe provide supports for that family so that we can make sure that, I mean, I want the kids in the building, but I don't want them sleeping while they're in class too, because they worked, an 8-hour shift that night or something like that. So
I wonder too how maybe our re-engagement center, how that can continue to evolve, because that's an outlet to do maybe more of a non-traditional school journey. So yeah, I could see connections there.
And again, I think that would be good for us to get that data. And then, I mean, obviously some schools it's just gonna show some schools need more supports, but at the end of the day, if we're able to hone in on those areas and take care of that stuff, it'll be a little bit easier to work that stuff out. So I had a couple other questions, but I think other board members had already asked them. So thank you all for the presentation. Thank you for the data and things like that. And I do appreciate the fact that just because a kid misses 5 days because they were sick but they still got their work done, we'll be able to know that stuff now. So thank you very much. All right, we will move on to subject 1.04, facilities planning, long-range facilities plan for auxiliary buildings. I'll turn it over to Superintendent.
Thank you. Our long range facility committee is really making some progress. It's excellent to see the groundbreaking at West. The meetings are occurring. So I would like to give the board a big pat on the back that you doing what you said you're going to do, and that you've made some really difficult decisions over the last year. And so now we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. We're also in a spot where we need some guidance from the board. And so John's come and put together a presentation that will allow us to review where are we, get some guidance, and that'll help us take next steps. So John, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. And just to acknowledge that we have a new face at the table, I thought we would start by just recapping a little bit of where we've been. Might help for others in the room who might not be familiar with all the work that's been happening. So it's really hard to see because it's tiny, but there you go. But this all started back in 2021. In June of 21, the district understood that they needed to embark on a long-range master plan. That process for soliciting services and engaging in help kind of took us until September, in which time we kicked off into the master planning process. That really started with setting a schedule of meetings, setting up this long-range planning committee that still meets regularly. This group has met for a long time, but what really happened is it shifted into what was called a facility master plan committee, which was a group of community members, parents, members of building leadership, teachers. It was a group of about 60 people that really had some intensive work, and they were charged with developing a pathway of organization that would affect the buildings, the grade arrangement, and the general direction that the district would move. That group worked intensively through November, December, into the next year, 2022, working through January to May. In May, a recommendation was made to the board, and this was an actual organizational pathway of change. So it was talking about the number of buildings, how those buildings should be oriented in terms of grade level. It gave guidance for how the district could start looking at a plan. This recommendation came without names of any buildings. So then the hard work kind of really happened, which was how do we apply this target of an organization to the buildings and the facilities we have. So from May through July of 22, we really dug in and started to apply the recommendations of the Facility Master Plan Committee to the actual buildings and properties owned by the district. In July, we made a presentation of what that change would be. We then embarked on a few community forums trying to get community feedback. There was actually a second committee that involved some community leaders, city leaders, trying to get some additional feedback on the implications of what these changes might mean. And then between November and December, it became an effort of really putting this into the recommendation of what would become a board vote for implementation of a district-wide master plan. Once we got done with kind of the overarching plan, then the next thing was, well, what are we going to do first? And so it became the effort of determining a first phase of that master plan. And that occurred between March and May of this year. Between December and March was a lot of the committee work, just trying to figure out what those projects might be. And then that came to the board starting in March to make recommendations of a first phase of projects for the master plan. So what happened in this? The organizational change affected not only the quantity of buildings, but the grade level orientation of how those buildings would operate. The district still has a lot of buildings, but had a lot more. We made the decision to move from 17 elementaries to 14. That also was considering that they would change from a K-6 configuration to a K-5 elementary. We have one K-8 building in the district that we made the determination that it would remain as a K-8. We had 4 intermediate schools, intermediate meaning they had a 7-8 grade level configuration, and we made the conscious change to move to 4 middle schools, which would have a 6-8 curriculum in those buildings. We did look into the high schools. It was widely held viewpoint that the high school 9 through 12 configuration, 3 buildings in the district, was still the right fit for the district, and so those would remain unchanged. When we moved from 17 buildings to 14, there were 3 buildings then identified that would be closed, and those are now not in operation for this school year, and those are Buchanan, Monroe, and Washington. When we move from 17 to 14 elementary schools, it plays a lot with boundaries, because we have to have a place for the students who are coming out of Buchanan, Monroe, and Washington in other buildings. And we have to do a couple other things to make sure we have a good balance of opportunity and good education pathway for the students in the district. So part of that December through May was reorganizing the boundaries for the elementary schools and taking a look at how they affect for the middle schools as well. That is something that went to an effect in the time that needed to happen to get registered for the start of this school year. There was a master plan timeline that was created that worked with this recommendation to the district that identified first phase projects. It also discussed potential opportunities for later phase projects depending on funding that would be available to the district. However, the first phase projects that were identified, one TJ just noted, West High School addition and renovation just broke ground, and construction is in in the throes right now. Monroe and Washington elementary schools were slated for demolition, and they will be demolished. That demolition makes way for the ability of Sudlow and Smart middle schools to expand. So it was necessary that the Monroe and Washington buildings went away so that we had the appropriate amount of space to be able to improve and expand Sudlow and Smart. North High School was identified as needing to receive some additions and renovations. There were high school turf field projects identified, which included multi-use turf fields to be placed at West High School, North High School, and the Brady Street complex. And then it was also identified that improvements would be made to the elementary schools that might be finish upgrades, furnishings, and technology. And this would be a district-wide approach so that things were being improved throughout the district, not just at certain buildings. So then that timeline is purposefully small so nobody can see the dates and try to pin me down on anything. But actually, this was kind of a master schedule. This was what was presented at the time that we discussed the phase one projects. It might shift a little bit here and there, but the general intent is that this schedule identified the sequence of projects and the general duration of how long it might take to get from beginning to completion so that we know when these projects will be available for use in the district. And so then why are we here? Well, we were also charged by the board to keep working. And part of that work is thinking about other projects in the district, but the other more important thing is how do we keep thinking about the footprint of the district? We have a very big footprint. We have a lot of facilities. Are there ways to look at continuing to gain efficiency in our footprint as it relates to ownership of buildings and properties in the city of Davenport? And so the bulk of what we're going to talk about tonight is considerations of what we can do. At the time we talked about phase one, some of the additional projects we talked about, as revenue would allow. There's a list there of things that would be nice to be able to do. One of the big ones was just mentioned in the last presentation, which is a district-wide solution for preschool. And that is something that is still going to be a high priority. And the results of phase one projects and master plan projects will allow for preschool to occur in our elementary schools throughout the district. Other projects listed here may change over time as we see, but these were some of the things that we thought were worthy of consideration as we move forward. So then in that list, you'll see transportation and operation facility needs and review of ancillary properties for continued district efficiency. And so that's the big footprint that we're trying to look at. So if you recall from the facility study, when we started on this, we had 39 individual pieces of building or property in the district totaling 527 acres. And when you put that on a map, it kind of looks like this. So each of those pieces of property had a bubble with a color and a number, and that corresponds to a bubble and a number that's placed on the map. You can see we have a lot of presence around the entire district boundary, not just in Davenport, but in the communities that we provide education. And of that list, we reduced it by 3. We have called for the demolition of Monroe and Washington. And so those buildings will no longer show on the list. The property is there because those are contiguous with our adjacent middle schools. The other is Buchanan Elementary. So that is a property that is still a holding, but is not in operation. But there's this whole list of 10 other pieces of property that aren't used for delivery of curriculum. They are necessary for the district. They do house functions, but we wanted to look at these and try to figure out, is there some efficiency that can be gained with these pieces of property? And so when we look at this list, after we take Buchanan, Monroe, and Washington out, we're left with the 14 elementaries, the 1K8, 4 middle school, 4 high school buildings, 3 children's villages. Please note, one is combined with Hayes. And then we have those 10 other district properties. When we look at these, they serve a variety of purposes. They're located in different locations in the district boundary. There's a 2021, 2022 operational cost data said that we were spending about $1.25 million per year on these properties just to run them. That's lights, power, some maintenance, whether it's lawn mowing or cleaning the floors. So it's not nothing. That's an annualized cost. There were some concerns that were talked about as we looked at these properties, potentially some loss of efficiency for staff because we're located at different buildings or complexes across the district. There is a duplication of space types that's owned by the district, and that would lend you to want to decide if there's some efficiencies to be gained. We are spending money on non-education spaces, so non-curriculum spaces. And so if we want to gain some improvement in the district, if we can reduce that footprint, it could free up some budget that could be spent on other things. There is some concern of impending maintenance and repair on some of these buildings and properties that you do own. And some of those show up in some of the studies, but some of these are ones that have popped up since. And then we've also been through a master planning effort. And so we're starting to understand that not all of these facilities or pieces of property would be necessary for fulfillment of master plan considerations. And so it may be worth considering some other opportunity for those. So our strategy options are, can we reduce the quantity of owned buildings and properties? Is there income that could be produced if there's a dissolution of those properties? And then, potentially that could return those buildings and properties back to the tax logs. So when we look at these, we group them together because there's some pockets where these exist. So West Kimberly Complex, that is the land and property out on West Kimberly Road. So I've grouped West Kimberly Complex and Kimberly and Wisconsin land. There's a significant amount of free land that the district owns, as well as the West High School baseball softball field complex. Those are contiguous pieces of property. It probably makes sense to consider those as one single holding as we're looking at this. There's this facility that we're sitting in tonight, the Administrative Service Center. Then we have at our Brady Street location, our athletic complex, the Army National Guard buildings. There's the 36th and Brady Street properties. So these are a series of properties that are along 36th Street. And then there's the bus garage piece of land that abuts some of the athletic complex property. On Kimberly Road, just west of the mall, we have our Davenport Learning Center and our Operations Center. And those are two independent buildings that exist on a campus that abuts each other. And then as you head out on 46th Street, head out on Eastern Avenue just past 46th Street to the north, there's a 20-acre parcel of land that's essentially called the 46th and Eastern Land. So as the group talked through this, we wanted to consider that the West Kimberly property, both the complex and the land, is probably something that's worthy for consideration of district ownership, meaning we might want to hold on to that for a bit. The complex itself is utilized for West High School athletics. It gets regular use. It serves its purpose well. West High School does not have anything on its property that could hold the type of functions that occur here, so this solves that problem for them. Replacing those facilities would take a considerable amount of money, and some thought went into why these were placed here when they were placed here. The other thing to note is as Davenport continues to grow, we already know that the east side of Davenport land is not available. And so growth opportunities really do start to exist to the west. And by holding property on the west portion of town, at least gives the district some considerable switches or levers they could throw if something needed to change or respond to growth in the city of Davenport in the long term. This building, the ASC, we clearly think this is a valuable piece of property and should retain in the interest of the district. It serves a big purpose for the district, but it also maintains a promise to the community itself by keeping a presence and preserving this building in the heart of the what we would call the downtown central core of Davenport. There's many opportunities for this building. It could remain as the administrative service center. There's potentially other uses that could happen with this building if that was something that the board wished to be explored. So we do feel that this is something that should be retained. When we look at the Brady Street and 36th complex, the group of properties, the general consideration is that these as well should be maintained. These properties primarily consist of a lot of athletic venues that are used for Central High School and also West and North. So practice facilities for Central and competition facilities for all three of our high schools. And so it's important that we maintain those facilities. They do serve a very good purpose. There's a considerable amount of land there, and we feel like this complex provides us the opportunity to create some solutions to gain some efficiencies in the district. This might lend itself for creating solutions where we could consolidate operations and maintenance and storage district-wide. And so having that at this Brady Street property is a good centralized location for the district and might allow us to consider some other properties in a different way. There's multiple buildings on these pieces of land, and those could serve the purpose of department offices, equipment and shop space, storage. There's other administrative considerations that can be lent to these buildings, and so we think that this has a whole lot of potential to solve some efficiency issues with the district if we want to explore that. But then that means that we would likely want to consider parting ways with the pieces of property that we have on Kimberly Road, which are the Learning Center and the Operations Center. These are actually pretty sizable pieces of property, and there's some pretty big buildings there. The Learning Center is, I believe, 70,000 square feet of footprint. It primarily has been used for storage over the years. The district bakery is in this piece of building as well, but there's a lot of unutilized space in this building, and it still costs the district expense to run the heat and cooling and lights in this building, even just to store materials. It would probably be a consideration for the district to vacate and sell the properties. They could be sold as one or as individual separate pieces of property. The learning center is very large, and if the district was to retain it and try to use it for something else, it probably would take a significant amount of capital to do some renovation to make it suitable for use. The operations center is a building that likely would be desirable to businesses if it was offered for sale or lease or some other opportunity in the city. The 46th and Eastern land, it's probably worth the consideration of letting this property go as well. It's one of the few in this part of town that's sizable and would be available for development. Predominantly, it would probably be a desirable residential development. It would probably be highly desired if it was offered for sale, and that would lead to development that would eventually expand the tax base of the district. However, what the committee discussed is that it would likely be something that would be a consideration to maintain an ownership of a piece of it. And that could be as individual lots or as a chunk of land that could be developed into lots, but those could serve the purpose of giving you a place to do the high school house build program. And so maintaining a quantity of those lots would give the district a place to do a trade program in town for a significant number of years, and that would be a benefit. That could be made as a stipulation of the sale of the property. The quantity of lots and the development of those lots could be determined at the time that a sale is done and worked out with whoever might be the purchaser of those properties. But we do feel that gives a good opportunity for the district while starting to reduce that footprint. And so the general recommendation would be to start reducing that footprint. And then the other considerations would be to start determining how we start looking at preschool and children's village campuses, because that would maybe require some thought as we start to think about what a district-wide preschool solution is. And so I went through that really fast. I presume there's some questions or comments about that.
Director Hayes.
Do we have any timeline as far as the demolition of the two buildings?
The two buildings will, we don't have the exact timeline. We just took bids for that work. The goal was that it would happen likely as soon as this fall. Before they're demolished, the city is going to use those buildings for police and fire training. And so it does provide an opportunity for our fire department to understand how to respond to emergencies in school buildings. So this is a really good training opportunity. And for the police department, it gives a really good opportunity to develop strategies for improved response for emergencies that might occur in our buildings.
They've actually done some training in there already. Some of the police departments have. And I believe the buildings are scheduled to be, the hope is by the end of the year, December-ish.
The furnishings for the cosmetic work in the buildings, has that taken place yet, or?
So you're talking the elementary buildings? Mm-hmm. We started getting that. So Jefferson's furniture started arriving last week. So we believe we'll have that in the building before school starts. The Hayes and Harrison furniture orders are coming. We just, actually the next board meeting, I believe we'll be discussing some of that. Some more purchases around that for Hayes and Harrison. Yep.
Director Klein-Jerome.
When we started all this, there was some talk about the possibility of building a school in the eastern part. If we were to get rid of this 46th and Eastern, do we still own land out there that if we did decide down the way to build a junior high or an elementary, we have the land, or this was the land we were going to build possibly, but that all got dropped.
This was the land we have. I don't believe we own any other stuff up there.
The feedback from the community was that they want to embrace the facilities we do have on the east side of Davenport. And so it seemed that the appropriate strategy was to respond to that need with the buildings you currently have. And so that's kind of driving that decision of, well, then a solution at the 46th and Eastern Land probably is not something the community is going to want to support. And so it makes sense to do something different with that property.
Okay.
Director Potts?
On the Kimberly properties, what has to happen elsewhere before those can be disposed of? Because the shops and all that stuff are located in that one building. And what are we looking at as a timeline there?
So the National Guard buildings on the Brady Street property really lend us the ability to consolidate nearly all the functions of those two buildings at the Brady Street complex. And that would then sort of bring a whole lot of things into a close quarters housing, which we think would help improve some efficiency for the district. We would need to move all that stuff right away and respond to how to best set that up for the district before we could offer anything with those pieces of property on Kimberly.
So the stuff that's at operations it's all the administrative staff, secretaries, and all the department heads. It's the carpenter shop. It's a warehouse for all the district supplies. The district bakery is out there. The maintenance shop for all the district vehicles is out there. Stepping Stones is out there. And there's another program, I believe, going out there as well. So all of those pieces would have to move before we were able to do that.
So have we just ballpark what we think that might look like, or timeline on that? Or?
We really don't have a timeline on that because I think part of it is there is district policy on how you go about the dissolution of property. So that's going to be one part of the picture, is figuring out how to go about what you're going to do with these properties. And then that sets the ball into motion for determining the next steps. And so I think we kind of have to keep a mindful eye on how to work the policy, and then we can respond to that. Part of determining the dissolution of property too is understanding what you want to do with it as well. And that might drive some of the timeline too.
We can start the moves though. I mean, we could start doing projects fairly quickly if we made a decision. It would be the dissolution of the property that would take a little bit longer, I think, but yeah, we can start working on it pretty quickly after we made a decision.
Hang on one second. Just for clarification, so everyone knows, when you get rid of a property and sell it, where does that money go? It doesn't go to the general fund. It goes back to Pebble.
Yes.
Wanted to make sure, because I don't want anybody reading that in the Quad City Times tomorrow morning.
You're correct.
Thank you. Director Hayes.
So the bakery could potentially go to the armory. Is that what you're saying?
It potentially could go over in those buildings or another location that would be suitable. So we could examine and see if there's other spaces within a building that we already have. Maybe I'm just throwing this as a scenario, probably not necessarily true, but maybe a school's already got a partial bakery there and some space next door. You could put it in a spot like that. Maybe it does go to the Brady Street area and just does work out of there.
Director Poston.
Josh, you took me through those buildings there at the Armory last year. I'm having a hard time figuring out how everything in operations and the bakery are going to fit into those buildings at the Armory. Like the building closest to the street off of, not on Brady Street, but the other street going past the complex.
The long one.
Yes. I mean, is that building going to be feasible to use? Are you thinking offices and that in there, or what are you thinking there?
We haven't gotten really far into the details of that or the use of those buildings, but I mean, we have to look at the age and the structure of them. But I think when you're talking office spaces and things like that, the next buildings seem to be a little bit more suitable for that type of work.
And part of it was using at the eastern end of that, there's 4 other buildings. So you have 3 buildings closer to Brady Street, 4 down at the east end, and then you still have the long garage building that's on the backside of the parking lot of the stadium. So it's dividing out to all of those pieces of building. I don't think you're going to solve it with one individual, no.
So would you administer the bus operations from there, or would that be separate?
I believe that what we're thinking right now is the bus operations would move across the street to the gravel lot with the big buildings, the National Guard buildings.
With their own administration there and their vehicle maintenance and
All that would be over there. There's
What
2
about-
buildings that we probably would use for something else, but
what about the building that's in the floodplain?
it would still stay there.
You would still use it?
They would have to use that as the maintenance shop for that bus garage.
Okay, so that would replace what's currently across the street and be adequate then?
Yes. We would have to do some work to it. It wouldn't be perfect, but we would have to do a little work to it to get to where it needs to be.
Okay. And there's enough room for all the buses there?
It's actually larger than what they currently have.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Superintendent Schneckloff.
John, was the recommendation for Buchanan up there as well?
I skipped right over that. Yes, Buchanan is, because we've closed it and we've identified that we're not using that as an elementary school any longer, that too would be one that the district would potentially want to put in consideration for getting rid of as well. Being a nice piece of land and a fully functioning building, there's probably a lot of opportunities for organizations or programs in the city that might be interested in taking that. So we feel that that's another one that would be on the list of properties that gets dissolved.
Director Klein Jerome.
But this school year, we are going to use Buchanan, right? It will not sit empty. There will be something being programs in that building.
As of right now, we do not have any programs in that building.
Ceci's not going in there.
Mm-mm.
Where will they be?
Ceci's going into the Davenport Learning Center. They fixed a couple classrooms in the back of it, and then they plan on utilizing that.
Okay.
Director Poston.
Then of all these buildings, would you say that the first one that would be the easiest to sell and we wouldn't have to do a lot of work and everything would be Buchanan?
That's correct.
Okay.
Director Potts.
I think I would like us to work up a plan for the Kimberly properties being disposed of, and then the follow-up plan as to where stuff goes and what that would entail. Because I think our overarching goal, our overarching need is to reduce the number of places we're maintaining. That's, and we've eliminated 3. If we can do these 2, that's 2 more. And the property on 46th Street is I like the idea of a couple of lots but otherwise we're renting that for farm ground. I think it's a bean field this year. And 25 acres is not a whole lot for a farmer to keep renting to grow beans and drive all the way into town to deal with it. You're going to ask, is there any more information anybody would need, right? I don't need any more information because I'm on the committee. That's,
Director Beck, did you have anything?
Yeah, I have, going back to the demolition of Washington and Monroe, I've had a lot of people asking me about making sure that the items in there, particularly anything like, auditorium chairs or lockers or whatever, has been offered to people if possible. So for example, if somebody wants to buy a couple of auditorium chairs or something like that, also that as little as possible of that is ending up in a dump. And so I know we've had conversations about this, about people coming in and, we've reshuffled all the furniture and technology that we think we can use elsewhere in the district. And I know we talked briefly about looking into whether, say, a restore group or something can come in and claim any, doors and woodwork and kinds of things like that they might be able to sell. Where are we on that?
So as of tomorrow, I believe the buildings they'll have just emptied all of the furniture that can be used or moved out of it. So that's where we're at right now. Really, the furniture just got out of the buildings. Bids came back for the demolition of the buildings today, and we have a meeting scheduled with one or two groups to go through the building in the next week or so to talk about different things they may want to take or need out of the buildings. For a couple of reasons, we need to limit to the number of people in the building and what they're taking, just for safety reasons, because some people may not realize what they're taking. But yeah, we're working with a couple of groups trying to do that right now.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not suggesting that like we let just random people come in and take something, but I know there is at least some interest in potentially auctioning or selling items that may be of neat or sentimental value to people who went to Washington or taught there or something. So but if you've got groups coming in to see what can be reclaimed, I assume that would be sort of the next step. If it can be reclaimed and sold, it will be, and if not, it won't. So
Yeah,
I just wanted
to a reasonable amount. That's what we're doing. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
One of the recommendations is to not let anybody take anything that requires destruction. So, because that would be an insurance liability to the district, and so don't take anything that you have to tear something apart to get it.
There's also items that have asbestos in them in the building and things like that we don't want to have people handling if they don't understand what it is. So
Right. Okay. So basically, I know we have asbestos abatement plans in place too, or we're getting to that point. I just want to make sure that if I tell people we have taken out and reclaimed as much as we can safely, that we are doing that.
okay.
One exciting thing is there's a big W in the center court of the basketball court at Washington, and that is being salvaged and retained. There's a date stone on the building that will be cut out and saved, and the discussion is that might serve as a marker on the property. As long as we aren't putting some piece of building, we could take that date stone and put it down in the ground and create a marker as to where the corner of Washington sat on that piece of land, which kind of commemorates it forever. Out in front of the building, there is the original bell, and that will stay intact and in place through any improvement on that piece of property as well. We didn't have the same kind of things at the Monroe building, so we didn't have that same opportunity though.
So there's no cornerstone or anything at Monroe?
There was no inscribed date stone there, no.
In a not so fancy way, or not so fun thing, maintenance and LIS is going through the building and grabbing up all the items they can get to salvage: cameras, IT equipment, clocks. I mean, just any little thing we can get our hands on to keep for moving to a different building and replacing something that doesn't work. So,
okay, thank you.
Yep.
Just to clarify something, obviously they're brick and stone buildings, so I'm assuming that stuff's not going to the landfill to go to like Tri-City Blacktop. They'll grind it up and then it'll be like the base for a road or something like that. It's not all going to the dump like everybody believes, correct?
We can't control what a demolition contractor does with it. Certain materials do get recycled. It's just part of the practice of demolition, and that's part of the strategy of landfills also, is they help divert that. Some products can easily be used for certain purposes and some can't. So we kind of let the people that do the demo really figure out what that is. A big question that comes up all the time is, can we reuse the bricks in whatever project we do next? And that is a really hard one, because when you demolish the building, the bricks usually get damaged or broken. Also, if you did preserve them, they'd have mortar all over them, and it would take a pretty laborious effort to clean all the mortar off just to make them suitable for reuse. So we try to use them for purposes more like you're talking about.
Okay. I would assume, since we had to hire an architect to demo a building, we could have something put in there that, hey, you should recycle that stuff. I would assume.
There are clauses that ask for things to be recycled, correct.
Director Kleindrum?
And I know I brought this up before, the electronic sign at Washington, is it going to be able to be moved? Because there are a lot of buildings that don't have the electronic outside sign.
We were looking into some of that actually, and some. This is off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember some conversations we had, but the cost to move it and the electrical was almost half or 2/3 the cost of putting in a new one, because depending on where they're at, they have to run the electricity to them and things like that. So we were discussing it. We're putting in some newer signs with some newer graphics rather than the red letterings going across or things like that. We have a lot better signs we're putting in now. So yeah, it's being debated right now.
But we still have a sign that's usable. So yes, you'd have to pay for the electrical of it, but you've got a sign that could be used in a building that's pretty prominent. Madison, where it's right there, lots of traffic. I would hate to see it just thrown away.
Okay.
Director Beck, do you have anything else?
No, thank you.
Does anyone have anything else? I'm going to throw my pitches in here. I like the idea of keeping the land out by the West High Athletic Complex, and I'm going to say it again because I really think we need to move all of our baseball and softball fields out there. It's awkward going to baseball and softball games at North. You got to walk through that building and everything, and we already have to move a field for Central, and we really need parking at Brady Street Stadium. I hate seeing students run across Brady Street, 4 lanes of traffic all the time because they have to park over there. We really, really need to focus on getting parking in there, and I think if we were able to make that our baseball complex just the same as Brady Street Stadium is our football complex, or they could have soccer there or whatever, and then have the practice fields there. I realize Central's limited because they're very landlocked where they are, but that's not Central's football stadium, and they believe that all the time. And when we keep putting things there, it just keeps adding to that. And we do have other high schools that belong to this district that have just as much rights to that. So I think if we could do something like that, that would help out on that. I agree with Director Potts on if we could figure out consolidating the 2 other buildings on Kimberly and maybe being able to do that. Obviously, the money from the sale of those buildings will be able to put into the other ones, but we would have to do the work on them first or whatever. But I like that. I do want, for the record, to everyone to know, because I know we've all gotten emails about Buchanan. This is the first time we've ever talked about this. And when people email trying to solicit us and we haven't even had a discussion on it, I think that's a little disingenuous, because then it puts the appearance out there that we've already discussed this. And this is the first time we've discussed anything like this. I know internally you all have discussed it and things like that, but then it doesn't put a good narrative to the board. They're supposed to be the stewards of all this stuff. So I do want to put that out there. I like the fact that we can look at starting to dispose of some properties and things like that to start getting more money back into our general fund, which we're not paying for the electric bill and everything like that, and staffing and all that. So I think that's good stuff too. What is it? Director Potts already said he didn't need any more information. What do you need from us to move forward? And then I'll go around and start asking folks.
So the first thing was just your direction, which is, I think we're understanding a little bit more definition on what it would take to actually be able to do something with the Kimberly properties. And then something that might prove as a good solution for the West Kimberly property, so we can explore that because it directly relates to some of the turf field work we're doing currently. Beyond that, it's going to be something that we might look to Kevin to talk to us a little bit more about. There is a district policy that you're going to have to follow if you go the route of dissolution with some of these properties. And so the next real big step would be to start having those conversations that would follow along with the policy.
You not right now? All right. Well, how are we supposed to know what we want to do then? I'm assuming there's timelines and everything. This is the law that Robbie Smith put in place, right? That's what you're referring to? And it created policies?
When you're talking about dissolution of property, that's something when you would go into a closed session to discuss sale of real property. So you want to do that in closed session. So maybe you tag this out at the tail end of a regular board meeting and go into closed session.
Thank you. So do you need me to go around the horn and see if everyone's good with putting a plan together with maybe looking at getting rid of some buildings? Okay. Director Hayes?
I'm in favor of it.
Okay. Director Passion?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is get wheels in motion to sell the Buchanan building. That would be the simplest and easiest move. And then go into the West Kimberly buildings. Maybe come back to the board with more of a plan on how the operations are going to fit in the existing buildings and how the bus lot is going to work. So we've got a little bit better idea on how that's going to go. And then the next thing would be selling the 46th and Eastern property. And I do like the idea of saving some of those lots for the student build home.
So along those lines, Director Pasha, you want like an aerial view of some of those locations so they can, like how the bus lot and everything will work? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
No, I think, well, Josh and architects, you can just kind of map out, okay, is this going to fit? And I think you got to look at the building and say, okay, are we going to tear into this building and is it feasible? Or is it better off just tearing down and build something new to make it more efficient for operations to work? So,
thank you. Director Klein-Jerome.
Yes, the Learning Center out there, the old vocational center, whatever you want to call it anymore. Yes, that's an eyesore. Out that way, Buchanan building, look into that, and the Eastern. No way would I sell the West Kimberly where the baseball field is. That we would never support that, nor would I support closing JB.
You already stated where you're at, Director Paz. Director Barnes?
I'm not sure that I can add a lot, but I think the one thing I'm craving though is sort of the guiding principles behind all these decisions. They're not making more dirt, and we're getting rid of dirt, and most organizations would never do that. So as we're making a case to our various stakeholders, I think having very clear principles that benefit our stakeholders that we can communicate to our stakeholders. I'm not in disagreement at all of getting rid of properties, but I'm not sure that the whole discussion should be around the dissolution of properties, given that lots of people would like to hang on to this. That's one of the reasons why we want to do this. So I'd love to be able to embrace those principles first, and then, in order to do this, we're gonna get rid of some properties.
Thank you. Director Beck.
I'm pretty good with the recommendations. I don't think I need anything else other than I would like to see the plan and get a little bit more detail on how we would go about disposing of the Kimberly complex. I agree, though, that like Director Potts, it might be a good idea to make sure that we can fit all of those things somewhere else first before we go too far down that road. But I'd be happy to see that go. But in general, the recommendations seem fine.
Director Poston.
I think one thing we need to think about, and we don't mention it enough, sometime down the road, we'll probably need to pass a bond referendum. And so I keep thinking about the taxpayer, and if we're hanging on to all these properties, to me, we're not doing justice to our taxpayers. And so, again, there's no point in hanging on to these properties unless we thought there was going to be expansion in those exact areas as far as needing a school building. We don't need it. You've said, Josh, we don't need it for operations where we can move it to another location. So just keep in mind the taxpayer and the taxpayer votes on bond referendums.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm good with you all putting something together and then coming back with us. I do agree with Director Barnes that we need to equate the decisions, yes, the taxpayers, but also the impact on the students in the classroom. Because I realize doing some of these things and updating these things, that gives us more money in the general fund, so we're able to focus more attention on that. And I think that is, at the end of the day, what always should guide our decisions on that is the effect that it's going to have in a classroom. And I think if we can, as we're having these discussions where we can correlate where that direct impact is, I think that that'll go a long way. So, all right, thank you for that presentation.
All right, thank you very much.
I'm taking a 5-minute break, man. I've been here since 4:30. And we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back.
Yeah, so I emailed her the document, so she's going to be participate and then send her input to TJ, and then I'll capture it.
Good. Allison's still on? Allison's still on? Is that, yep, okay, thank you. All right, we're going to come back. Now we're going to move on to subject 1.05, the communications plan. And tonight we have Shane Williams from the Mississippi Bend AEA to facilitate this for us. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shane.
All right, thank you, President Gosa. Linda and I were reminiscing beforehand, just the number of times I used to be at the board meetings, but it's been a while. So appreciate the opportunity to come back and facilitate a discussion. I think it goes without saying how critical communications are, and having an effective and coherent communication strategy is in today's world. Probably never been more important than it is right now. So TJ, in keeping with the spirit of that criticality and how important it is, asked me to come and facilitate a discussion because you're going to be making some very important decisions here in the very near future, which will set you up for years of a long-term, coherent, and effective communication strategy. So tonight is really going to be about discussion. A lot of board interaction, a lot of sharing of ideas. I'm going to be capturing your ideas on chart paper so that ultimately when you come back at your next board meeting or the one after that, you'll be able to make a decision about the path that you want to go down as a board, representing communication for your internal and external stakeholders. So I am going to be asking you to take some notes tonight, to share your thoughts, engage in some elbow conversations with other board members. The goal here is to make sure that you're surfacing your thoughts so that the board can speak with one voice when it comes to this important topic on communication strategy and what the path forward looks like. So our outcome for tonight is not to make a decision. Tonight is really about engaging in a structured dialogue about communications to ensure a coherent and effective strategy as a school board representing the school district moving forward. That's what tonight is all about. So less about decision making, more about conversation, dialogue, surfacing some strengths and weaknesses of what our current reality is, and then, like I said, executing a effective strategy moving forward. So first thing I'm going to ask you to do is, if you have something to write with, just take that out. I put a little rubric or a little framework in front of you to help guide the conversation here, a graphic organizer to help us keep our thoughts on the same page. So when you think about the Davenport Community School District and you think about what is the ideal state for communications, what are some words, individual words, or some short phrases that come to mind when you think about having a world-class communication strategy that this board can execute day in and day out for the stakeholders? So I want you to jot your ideas down in that first box or on a separate piece of paper that says, guiding question. What do we want and need with our district communication strategy? So I'm going to give you about 1 minute. Just write down thoughts that surface. When you think about our communication strategy as a district, what thoughts and ideas come to mind? Okay, about another 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to ask you to turn and talk to a neighboring board member. So we'll have Director Barnes and Director Potts, and then we'll have a 3 conversation here and then 2-way conversation here. And Director Beck's going to be sharing her thoughts with TJ via text. So let's just have a real quick 2-minute processing, and then I'm going to ask for some of those ideas that surface in your small groups. Okay, in about 30 seconds, I'm going to ask each group to give me about 2 or 3 ideas that we can capture on the chart paper here. So 2 to 3 ideas, give you about 30 seconds, maybe come to a quick little consensus on what you think are the key bullet points. All right, we'll start with Director Barnes and Director Potts. Just throw out some ideas that I'm going to call these communication must-haves. These would be critical functions that we would expect to have in a coherent and effective communication strategy. So just toss out a couple of ideas that we can put up here as must-haves.
Communication of good news consistently and clearly, effectively highlighting our district's strengths. And how do we get ahead of other districts and lead or demonstrate a leadership position? Do you need to amplify? Do you care to amplify? Did I get that?
Good. Okay, our team of 3 here. What are some ideas that surfaced in your context?
All right. Transparency, informative, current, uplifting, and diverse. Roll in with yours.
Keeping the community informed in different ways. You can't just rely on social media because not everybody has access to that. Sharing great things going on in the district, not just things that come to the school board, but that are out there in the buildings that need to be shared as well.
I'll put a star by that one because that one's, yeah, well, that one's seconded too with it sharing the good news and highlighting that. Anything else from Director Becker?
Yeah, widespread, positive, professional, targeted, consistent.
We had consistent also come up, so I'll just maybe put a star by that one too because that was seconded. Okay, Director Postion, Director Hayes.
Accurate, something that's cascaded throughout the district where everyone is on the same page.
Okay, so let's just review this really quickly. So
We're not
what the
done.
board is, oh, I'm sorry.
We're not done.
Oh, you're not done. Keep going then. All right.
It's what's already been said, but just to focus on the successes of students.
Oh, I like that. I like that success as a student. It goes back to what President Gosa said earlier. Why are we here? It's for the kids ultimately. So highlighting those successes is a critical function. So as we look over this, what we're doing is we're starting to think, what is our long-term strategy? If we could get to our ideal state, when people think about Davenport Community School District in the communications, this is what we want those communications to represent. So this is like our guiding light, our vision. We do the same thing when we talk about literacy adoption or math adoption. What do we want all learners to know and be able to do? That's our vision. The next step is we have to come back and say, okay, where are we now? If this is where we want to be down the road, if this is our North Star, this is what we're aiming for, the next step is to say, what's our current reality? And then we have to talk about how do we close the gap between current reality and our desired state. So the next piece I'm going to ask you to focus on here, just some silent reflection time and some writing, is that next box. What's currently working? Okay, what are some things that we're doing well right now with our communication strategy? And conversely, what are some areas that need attention? Let's go about another 20 seconds to capture your thoughts on what's working and what's not working. All right, same thing. Let's turn and talk to our elbow partners. Share your thoughts and ideas about what's currently working with the communication strategy and what's currently not working with the communication strategy. So we'll share our thoughts, do the same thing. We'll synthesize some input from each of the groups. Okay, if you could wrap your conversations up there in the next few seconds here. And this time we'll start over here with Director Postian and Director Hayes, and then we'll go around the horn this way. So let's start with that group. Just what's working right now with the communication strategy?
Well, Linda and I discussed, we thought the branding that was done, growing excellence, I think that was a strong point. Some of the workshops we had, for example, the media workshop, how to address and handle media in different situations.
So for mine, I kind of came at it from the parent perspective. The robo dialers, I'm still getting a ton, even though my kids have been registered for a while now. The emails about registering my kids for school, still getting them. They've been registered for a while. And the newsletters from the buildings that my kids attend.
Anything else, Director Beck or Director Klein-Jerome?
I think social media presence is out there more in our branding.
Social media, the branding, logo work, and a big turnaround in negativity in the news.
I got professional.
Professional and polished. They rebranded the district. They managed our recovery from the state takeover. I mean, we were like up that famous S Creek.
Dr. Barnes.
I think I would concur that it's what's the current reality and what's working is stabilization of messaging, and then I do think that the rebrand of the district has been effective, and I would also agree with the social media, but where I'm seeing that is more in what I would describe as a different social media network, and that's LinkedIn. I think the content there is very, very good. Don't know about the rest though.
Okay, so let's go back this way, and now let's talk about what's missing. What needs attention with the current strategy that's being executed?
It still seems like there's a bit of reactive mode rather than proactive. Because of the stabilization, it's time to start thinking ahead, showcasing stability, progress, and vision, which I think is the next step to all of this great rebranding. And what needs attention? I mean, we're still losing the messaging war, and all we have to do is look at the transfers out of the district. I mean, even though we've done really good work, that's the key.
Basically the same thing. We need, it's time to move to the next, I say, to the next phase, and the board has to give that direction.
Yes. Okay, so gaps.
Our website, success of students and opportunities that are out there. I don't think we're getting the message out to people, like our CTE programs, all of our music programs. There's a lot of things going on that should attract kids to the district, but we aren't getting the information out.
Website was number one for me. Success of students, and then I put regionalized. I think when we put messages out, we should maybe 1 week's the central region, 1 week's the north region, 1 week's the west region, and we start hitting all those things and get it in a rotation. And the other one was course offerings. We don't tout our story enough on all the things that we offer.
And Allison's our website, getting out ahead and tooting our own horn. And now I think she's just playing with me and making me say funny things like this now.
Thank you, TJ. Yes.
Linda and I, we talked about being more timely, and that's what some of you said, just getting out ahead of everything. But the other thing we talked about is that maybe as a board, we've been at fault because we maybe didn't give enough direction on what we wanted. And so I think as a board, we've got to make sure, we communicate that.
I think somebody, maybe it was Director Potts or Director Barnes, the board has to own that strategy. That's part of your function as a board. So I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable there. Director Hayes, anything to add?
And also, like someone has said, our courses. I saw a flyer in the last couple of weeks that I didn't even realize we had with all the various things offered on them. And I think that needs to be disseminated better so more people know about it.
Yep. Good. So again, just to make the analogy with what we do, for example, in literacy, I know the board is making decisions about curriculum adoption, and what you do is you say, what's our vision for all readers? And then what's our current reality? And what is the best curriculum program to go from our current reality to our desired future? That's what we're doing here. So if this is our desired future, and this is our current reality, we currently have some gaps. So the question is, what is the best strategy for us to close that gap? And you basically have two mechanisms as a board that you can decide or make a determination, and that is, are you going to continue with an external person managing your communications, or is that something that would be better served bringing that in-house and having an internal communications? Those are really the two mechanisms that districts really have to grapple with. And so we're trying to surface now, okay, if this is our desired reality in our current, and then we're currently at, what of those two paths is the best one for Davenport Community School District to close the gap from where we are to where we want to be? So if you jump down to the next box on there, we're going to flesh out now just what those two paths forward are. And there's, with any decision, there's upsides and downsides, no matter what you decide to do, whether it's a curriculum decision, there's always going to be an upside and a downside, and the same is true with communication. So when we look at the two paths forwards to potentially close the gap, what we're trying to do here is surface strengths and weaknesses from each of those paths, and then that way we're giving full attention as a board that we're making the best and most informed decision for our stakeholders and the right strategy for us. So we're going to first flesh out some upsides and downsides of the external communications. Like, there's benefits to that. There's some drawbacks to that too, and we want to make sure that we surface all those upsides and downsides. So you're just going to do that for the external piece, and then we're going to talk about that as a board. What are some strengths? What are some weaknesses? Or what are some upsides and downsides of having an external communication strategy? So go ahead and do that. I'll give you about 2 minutes to get your ideas down there. We're just doing the external side, and then we'll work over to the internal side. another 20 seconds on the external communication. All right, go ahead and share with your elbow partners just what came to mind when you thought about both the upsides and the downsides of the communication strategy. Okay, we ready to share out? We'll maybe start with President Gosa and Director Klein Jerome's input first. So let's start with the upsides, Karen or Dan.
I put it's their business, their wheelhouse. Professional, team, and the offerings. I'm just trying to give you one worder, Shane, make it easier.
They know how to brand. There's a team approach to it.
Allison said those same things. And an outsider perspective can be helpful.
Director Hayes, Director Poston.
They can be more objective from the outside looking in and professional. More resources.
Director Potts.
There's greater accountability because we're the customer. They have more contacts and more resources, a larger internal talent pool.
Okay, so if these are the upsides, let's go around now and let's talk about what are the downsides to having an external team manage the communication strategy. And we'll start back here on this side.
The district is not their primary focus. It could also be a one-size-fits-all model rather than customized for us.
I said they may lack institutional knowledge.
I said they don't know the district, the people, the programs, except for what is passed on to them from the superintendent.
I have delayed responses, not in the buildings, cost, turnover, and not familiar.
downsides.
Again, cost and the inability to witness real-time events. The inability to witness real-time events.
Got your question. Got 'em.
Good.
Good. Okay, so upsides, downsides of an external communication. Now let's talk about the internal side. So again, 2 paths here to close the gap from current reality to desired state. So same thing, maybe a little less time. I think you're picking up the pace here on that. So upsides of using an internal communication strategy and the downsides of using an internal communications team. Okay, it looks like your discussions are wrapping up there. So let's maybe start with Director Poshin and Director Hayes. Let's just focus on the upsides of having an internal communications team manage the strategy.
Familiarity, accuracy, and the ability to witness real-time events.
Director Poshin.
And then goes along with know the district better. Have it.
Institutional knowledge, share district goals, specifically vested interest, focus on us, and partner with curriculum and students for learning opportunities.
Say the last two. After.
Can partner with curriculum and students for learning opportunities.
Know the district, combine resources, and be in the building to get out ahead.
They can be in the buildings meeting with people regarding programs and successes, keep the website current, and get information out in timely, quick manner.
Thank you. There'd be easier access to them. They may have institutional knowledge, I mean, assuming you have an internal hire.
Director Barnes.
Just that they're ours and proximity to leadership.
Okay, we'll jump back to you for the downsides of having an internal team.
Can we afford it? Will whatever team have the sufficient bandwidth? And how would we prevent them from getting bogged down with all of the other things that they always get bogged down with?
Director Potts.
You could be dealing with turnover. You have a limited talent pool or resources, so you still may have to contract services. And the cost.
Oh, I just said cost.
I said cost. You potentially lose the outside perspective, whether it's internal or external hire. And then I just put hiring, because hiring is always a process anyway.
In cost and turnover and no outside perspective. Rouse.
May not have the experience or the resources.
Less familiar with the media outlets and the correct verbiage.
Wow, good sharing. Thank you for thinking so deeply about this topic. So what we're going to do next is highlight some important considerations from your perspective as a board. So I dropped two colored dots in front of you. So you have green and you have red. So ultimately what we're going to do is I'm going to take this feedback back, synthesize it, and provide it to Superintendent Schneckloth, and then that can guide your decision that you make at a subsequent board meeting. That's kind of the goal here is that we leave here today maybe with a better understanding of where our fellow board members are, but not to make a decision, but we understand what those two different paths forward are, the upsides and the downsides of each. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your green dots and you're going to put them on one of the considerations up here or multiple considerations that you think are the most critical considerations that the superintendent, board president, and others need to make when making this decision for the recommendation. So for example, you might think that the external communications team, green means good, by the way. Green is like, hey, this is an absolute critical driver. We need to have this. If we don't have this, it's going to be problematic to execute our strategy. So maybe you think the objectivity is really important. Like we have to have an impartial communications team manage that just because there's better checks and balances in those pieces. So you want to put a green dot next to the more objective piece. And if you think that is absolutely the most critical thing ever, you can put all three of your dots on that particular one, or you can spread them out. And on the red side, you might think a downside is services are not customized. Like, we need more customized services. That's a drawback of having an external team. I'm going to put a red dot on that because to me, that's an absolute deal breaker. It's so critical that we have customized, personalized services for our community. And if you think that that is one that has a great deal of leverage, you can put all three of your red dots on that particular one. If you're looking at and you only have three, so you have to be really selective about how you're going to do that. So focus on those ones that are most important to you. So for example, upsides of internal communications team. If you think knowledge of the district is an absolute must, it's a non-negotiable for you, you're going to put a green dot on that know the district. And again, if you think that is a major essential ingredient, you could put all three of your green dots on that, because that to you is the preeminent consideration that you're making for this decision as a board member. Likewise, if you think a drawback is maybe the cost, you're very concerned about the cost of bringing that in-house, might be more expensive to manage an internal team, you're going to put your red dot or red dots on that, or you can spread them out. So what we're looking for is green means good. This is a strength. It's a consideration that we have to take under advisement as a board when we're making this decision. And it's one of those things that will really help us to execute our strategy. And a red is, we got to deal with that, or it needs to be taken completely off the table because it's too much of an alarming issue for us. So I'm going to ask you as board members to stand up, take your green dots and your red dots. You put them on the bulleted considerations of the upsides and downsides that you think are most pertinent for you as a board member.
Shane, are you picking all these up? Can you get Brenda a copy? I'll scan them tomorrow. It's up to you. Yeah, the last summary piece. Yeah.
Did you get Allison's? Okay, looks like we're wrapping up. Just have one closing piece here for board members. As you look at the two posters here, do I need to tell the superintendent to wrap it up? Oh, you're taking pictures. So what will help, I think, in guiding the decision so that the board arrives at the best path forward for the students, community members, internal and external stakeholders is for y'all to take a look at what you observe up here in terms of the green dots and red dots and just write a closing summary statement. In the last box at the bottom of the page, just says summarize your observations. When you look at these two pieces of chart paper, just write a quick summary statement. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect these papers. I'm going to synthesize all this, type it up into a logical format, send it to Superintendent Schneckloth and President Gosa so that can guide your discussion when you come back together. But just a summary statement. When you look at this, what do you observe? How you doing, buddy? Okay, as we close out this, TJ is actually putting dots up here for Director Beck. So we'll make sure that her voice is heard in this conversation too. I'm going to ask each of you just to go around and just share one summary statement. If you wrote more than one, that's fine if you want to share more than one. But otherwise, just capture your thoughts, share it with your fellow board members as you look up here and you summarize your thinking, what came to mind. And we'll start with Director Hayes, if you don't mind starting with us.
As a board that as different as we are, that we pretty much put our focus most and least important pretty much in the same areas.
Looking at this and where everybody put their preferences, then my thought would be that we would stay with external communications.
President Gosa.
I just put like reading on that knowledge of the district's very important.
What I said is that it's important for us to know the district, have shared goals, as well as timely and quick responses, which all were listed as internal communication upsides.
Thank you. Director Potts.
The one thing I would say is that the board has to give the explicit direction as to what we want the communications people to produce.
Thank you. Director Bones.
Mine is not all that different. External or internal teams can both be effective, but they need to know what we want them to do. That's the bottom line on this.
That's that effective and coherent communication strategy, which is really, that's again the purview of the board. So again, thank you all for sharing your critical thoughts, engaging tonight. I do want to collect those papers so I make sure that I get everybody's thoughts captured before I send that summary to the superintendent. So appreciate that. TJ, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to wrap up.
Thank you, Shane, for facilitating that for us. We greatly appreciate it. Being that's the end, Director Potts, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed,
Aye.
same signs. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.